Welcome back, everyone, for the final spotlight session of today on the German donor instruments. The session will be facilitated by Dr. Julia Steets, the director of our big sister, the German Public Policy Institute, and she will engage with Rüdiger Schöch from Plan International. And please, Julia, take it from here.
Thanks very much. From the Global Public Policy Institute, the German will come next, I think. Right. Wonderful. So we will continue to talk about the nexus. In my experience, when we start thinking about the nexus, we usually do so from an operational perspective. It's really about how we can make this work on the ground. And there's a lot, obviously, that operational agencies can do. So when you plan, it's about long-term thinking and planning together. When you analyze, it's about considering risks, including conflict risks. It's about having an exit plan, and it's about monitoring not just your activities, but also results, outcomes. But then at one point or another, the discussion and the practice usually comes back to donors. There will be questions like, is there actually enough development funding available for high-risk areas? Is there funding that can cover transitional activities that link between humanitarian and development? And is it possible in the administrative environment that we have to have a smooth transition between more humanitarian and more development activities? So I think it's interesting that we have seen quite a bit of movement on the donor front, globally speaking. We do have quite a lot more multi-year humanitarian funding from that side. We also have more crisis modifiers in development funding on the other side. And there have been quite a lot of commitments, particularly around the Global Compact on refugees and how to do a comprehensive response for refugees in recent years. So what we want to look at now in this session is where Germany comes in on all that. And to do that, it's really my pleasure to welcome Rüdiger Schöch from Plan International. But just to alert everybody else as well that just as in the past sessions, you will be able to post comments, questions at any time in the chat, and they will be brought to us at the end. And we'd be curious in particular to hear from you whether you have experiences with the changes that Germany has recently introduced and how you see those, or perhaps if you know and have experience with any other alternatives or good practices. So at any time, write to us in the chat, we'll summarize it in the end and address it. But now to you, Rüdiger, perhaps we should simply start with the basics. And I'd just like to ask you, what are those changes concretely that Germany as a donor has recently introduced?
Yeah, thanks, Julia, and thanks for the opportunity to the chat to speak here. These questions may not be as juicy as some of the early ones, some might think, but I think they're just as hard a nut to crack as you have aptly outlined, Julia. And I think if we look at what has recently happened in Germany, well, I'm coming at this from a multi-mandate organization, let's say, and we're really trying from our side as well to bring things together. And what we've seen is that, especially following the WHS, the World Humanitarian Summit, Germany has taken some of the grand bargain commitments forward. You mentioned the multi-year funding. I think the longer-term predictable and flexible funding for humanitarian action, especially in protracted situations, is something fundamental for us to be able to actually bring things together and link them in this Nexus framework. And we have definitely seen progress in this with multi-year funding being now also made available from the humanitarian side of the German government. And we've seen the average project duration extended significantly over the last couple of years, which is a big step forward for us. They're also working on developing ways of working across the line ministries to offer funding for explicit Nexus programming, specifically the recently introduced Nexus Chapeau Approach, which also, and I would like to mention that because you've highlighted the difficulty sometimes in finding funding for transitional assistance. I think this is really trying to leverage a specialty that we have here in Germany, which is the transitional development assistance, which is has been developed to sit at the linkages between the humanitarian and the longer-term development assistance. So I think in general, the German government is encouraging partners to think within the Nexus approach. They're requiring them to some extent also to do this and to propose projects that will work in such a context.
Wonderful. Now, this chapeau that you mentioned, how exactly does that work? What is that?
Yeah, so that's another German specialty, I'd say. It's a joint approach for operationalizing the Humanitarian Development and Peace Nexus. That is the ambition, to bring together humanitarian action and set transitional development assistance. And it is explicitly aimed at strengthening collective outcomes, synergies, division of labor, transparency, and coordinated project planning and implementation. Now, these are ambitious goals across a range of different dimensions, as you'll see. And this is something that has been recently piloted, so we're yet to see exactly how it plays out, but it is effectively a document where these different elements are brought together to link between two projects, where these linkages are documented and can be reported against. So maybe that sums up the idea behind it. And if government colleagues are online here, they are obviously welcome to comment later on.
Great. As you said, very ambitious goals here, quite a lot of goals for the Chapeau approach. Now, the piloting is ongoing in a number of countries, and first reflections and experiences are coming back from there. What are the kinds of effects that we are starting to see?
Yeah, so they range from the positive effects that those partners who are implementing the pilots are seeing. For example, they see valuable programmatic complementarities, so they can actually link different activities in the different areas much more effectively. They also have reported a broadening of their coverage, for example. And synergies in terms of project running costs, in terms of shared staff, etc. They're also reporting some challenges, projects that really remain separate with two distinct sets of proposals, of funding guidelines, of reporting structures, and maybe giving credit or being fair in the sense, I'd like to point out that most pilots that have been rolled out were initiated by the ministries based off projects that had been submitted separately. So the links were sometimes perceived a little bit as artificial, with the Chapeau document being seen a little bit more as an additional requirement on top, sort of an afterthought. But again, this is really just a piloting, and I think it's important to point out that the ministries, and I know this because the ministries have actively engaged in dialogue and been keen to hear back and learn. And for example, based on feedback received, if I'm seeing it correctly, they have aligned some of the reporting requirements to lessen the burden on the implementing partners of the pilots or of the Chapeau. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I'm understanding that in terms of the administration of the Nexus, we're only beginning to tackle the problems. And sometimes what you said sounded like we're almost adding, at least in terms of requirements in burden. So are we cracking the nut, administratively speaking?
Yeah, I don't think we have indeed. I think it is to some extent something that comes on top. We are keeping the different funding streams separate, which is also in our interest to some extent. But I think even the alignment is sometimes still so difficult really to crack. So we have different funding allocation calendars, for example, that make it quite difficult to plan, because, for example, once you know that one of the projects will be funded, you'll have to wait some time before you know whether or not the other part will be funded. So it will be, you'll have to kind of, it makes planning a bit more difficult. So far, it hasn't, I think, entirely glossed over the difficulties in aligning the instruments, which has been aggravated, I should say, by the spending review process, at least as we've seen it from the NGO side. But we see the willingness of the two divisions to introduce flexibility where they can. So, for example, the discussions on the Chapeau has also in the past led to one of the funding instruments taking over elements from the other to make a more comprehensive project. So that's kind of flexibility that we see. But also in terms of administration, or even programmatically, we find that local partners find the concept quite hard to grasp. So it's another challenge to when we develop these projects with the Chapeau idea, to develop that with the partners.
Okay, great. So from that experience, are there any lessons emerging that help the operational partner? So if you were to try to make the best out of the change, are there any lessons on how we need to use this instrument?
Yeah, I think in short, I would say it can be very valuable if you use it as early as possible. If you have that triangular dialogue as early as possible, even before submitting project ideas, then it can actually serve and stimulate debate around common objectives and also the expectations of the different parties involved. And then it really can add a lot of value, I think. If it's introduced too late, it becomes more, a bit more cosmetic, let's say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. And perhaps to link back to the session we had just before this that focused more on the peace component of the Nexus. So far, I've heard a lot about transitional financing, and it always sounded a little bit like humanitarian and development. So how far does this change go? Does it also cover the peace element of the Triple Nexus?
So this initiative we've just been talking about, the Chapeau Approach, explicitly doesn't. So it's limited to the humanitarian funding and the traditional aid funding. Neither the peace component nor the longer-term development assistance component is there, which we would, of course, love to see there to have like a coverage of the full Nexus spectrum. But it is an even harder nut to crack to stay with that metaphor, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great. Now, we've been discussing this road that the German government is walking down at the moment, and the Chapeau approach it has started to use. What about other donors, though? Have you been hearing things from elsewhere that really hold good practices or lessons for us, so somewhere where we could also copy and learn? Or if not, are there alternatives out there that we could think about at least? And other approaches to implementing the Nexus from the donor side?
Yeah, thanks. I'm really glad we're also coming to this because I mean, I haven't done a comprehensive study or anything of the sort, but I don't think there is the one model that has cracked it or that's the gold standard out there. From what I can see, what the German government is currently trying, that's already quite advanced, and there's really a willingness there to try new things and develop it. If we're looking at the EU pilots, for example, they've been developing a lot of things over the last couple of years, but for us as partners, we really haven't seen a breakthrough there. there's been very little consultation with international or local civil society. For example, the institutional structures are even more rodent and complicated in a way. The trust funds that we had expected to maybe push the Nexus funding a little bit, that really remains to be seen. They've now been integrated in a new funding instrument, so that remains unclear. And so on. So if we are looking at some of the Nordic donors, I've also heard from my peers that they're also keen for partners to work in the Nexus, but it's really difficult to align the different funding streams. So we're in the German landscape, we're not alone in this, and we're certainly trying to find solutions, and we'll keep pushing from the civil society side as much as we can to make it practical, but we also appreciate what the government is trying to do. But maybe beyond the donors, I'd like to highlight one thing, and that is that we like to think about the Nexus not at the project level, but more the need to create a Nexus and common objectives as a program level, really, to which then individual projects will contribute. And that is something that we've been proposing to donors, and that donors, not only German donors, but also German donors have been interested in taking up independently of the Nexus Chapeau that is now being developed. And it really allows for other levels of flexibility within the funding when it comes to adapting to varying needs across the timing of the time of a program. In terms of sectors and geographical areas, for example. So such a program approach also makes it easier maybe then to actually then apply a Nexus Chapeau approach. Maybe that for now.
Great, very interesting, Rüdiger, and thanks. I think it's good for us to be reminded that this is not a problem that Germany faces on its own. I think sometimes the discussion here sounds like we are having a particularly difficult situation due to the institutional setup, but in fact, it sounds like any donor faces the same. And to think about this in terms of a program approach sounds very, very interesting. Now, I'm out of the corner of my eye, I have started seeing comments coming in, and I hear that Darina would be willing to pick those out and summarize them for us. So over to you, Darina. Thanks for doing that.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to feed in the questions from the online audience for the last time today. And thank you again to the online audience to be very active and very vivid. I'm afraid many questions came in just a minute when I went here, and I cannot hand in to you all of them. But first of all, we have a question on the flexibility in funding. So Patrick from Humanitarian is asking, well, although our Triple Nexus is not clear conceptually, it is still helping to deal with several intricacies within our context. The German government funding streams that Rüdiger has mentioned are very welcome, but Patrick, he fears that sometimes the situation will still require a very special and I guess also contextualized approach in funding. So this flexibility in funding is very important to him. And then questions regarding the pilots that have been mentioned, coming in from Markus Geiser from ICRC. In what context do these pilots actually take place, for example, in conflict context, natural disaster context, etc.? Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that. Additionally, he is also posing a question, what about the humanitarian principles again? Have these pilots been humanitarian principles bulletproof? And how do the humanitarian principles bulletproof, how bulletproofed are they already? And I'm sorry. So that's the first couple of questions I'd like to pose to you.
Wonderful. I take it that the first one was more a comment, but Rüdiger, perhaps you can take up the one on the context of the pilots and the question of the humanitarian principles.
Yeah, so that's a tough one. We've also been grappling with already throughout the day. I don't think we've really analyzed that side of the programming at this point. The pilots have been taking place in situations like Iraq and Somalia, but also in Sudan and Lebanon. So it's different kind of settings that it's been tested out in, and it includes conflict settings. So I think it remains to be seen on the implementation or the respect for the humanitarian principles. And as we've seen earlier today, I think that question is a lot larger than the funding streams that come behind, although obviously especially the factor of independence is playing into this when it comes to the donors. I'd maybe just comment also back to Patrick on the flexibility, and I'm not sure this was meant in this way, but I think I'm certainly one to stress how important it is not to make everything an access program and to trying to straitjacket things into a nexus approach that really don't belong there. And I do think that's not I hope, and from what I've heard, that's really not the intent. But that discussions around, for example, also the Chapeau document, as I've mentioned, can actually lead to a decision not to fund something together, but to decide that this is not the right context for that. And that's certainly something that we as a civil society should also stand up to and say, no, this is not a situation where we think it's appropriate to work in a nexus situation, which then comes full circle to the question around the humanitarian principles. As soon as we do our proper context and conflict analyses, as we've heard this morning, and we see red flags around that, we as organizations should also be raising that with our donors and either pulling the plug on a kind of project that will cross these red lines that we've identified, or find ways of modeling them in a way that will be better suited for the context.
Great, thank you, Rüdiger. I think we have a couple more minutes, so we could hand back to Darina for another round of comments from the audience.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that a lot, because lots of questions just came in here and are so interesting. So I'd like to introduce the question posed by Kira from ACF here in Berlin. She rightfully stated that we've been discussing the German government funding streams so far, but what about experiences with other donors such as DFID or CEDARS and so on? Are there any experiences that you can share in terms of joint programming and funding, etc.? And another one maybe related to that, is there any signs to extend the Chapeau approach for development cooperation?
Rüdiger, great for you.
Yeah, so I mean, I've already I've used all the information I had in my last answer, let's say, on the other donors, and maybe there is somebody in the audience who can speak to that, because I know we have some international colleagues joining. So on the EU side, and for example, the Danida side that I cited earlier, there's certainly also a lot of challenges rather than the good practice, as far as I can tell. Yeah, so maybe we can play that back to the audience if somebody has anything exciting to share.
All right, wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, and sorry, Julia, the last question on the development, I can't speak to that. From what I know, there's no intent to expand it to development at the moment. But again, if there's somebody from the line ministries who wants to share some intelligence, that would be exciting, of course.
Wonderful. And I think we're right on time. Thanks so much, Rüdiger, for sharing all your insights. And thank you, other participants, for sharing questions and comments. With that, I hand over to Ralf.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Rüdiger, and for passing the ball back here. And actually, the topic will be the one we pick up tomorrow morning, so we can share all the questions from the audience and what you didn't want to address further right now. Tomorrow morning with high-level guests on the donor side. We will welcome Bärbel Kofler, the Commissioner from the Federal Government of Germany for Human Rights and for Humanitarian Assistance. We will welcome Michael Köhler, the Deputy Director General of ECHO. We will welcome the BMZ and the peace expert of BMZ to discuss all these issues in further detail. And we will have colleagues from Geneva. NRC will join us from Geneva and Oxfam from Mali. So surely we will have time to further discuss the topics Rüdiger and Julia so kindly elaborated for us and kicked them off. So a big thank you once again to Julia and Rüdiger. It's been a long day. You can see maybe a bit in my back that it's getting dark actually already in Berlin. Wintertime started this weekend and it feels a bit like autumn, winter. And we had lots of discussions almost for in total 7-8 hours, including the breaks over the course of the day. I think it has been intense. We looked into the Triple Nexus in practice. We looked into a survey confirming that you think this is a key issue we should look into and further discuss. We discussed what it means to put the Triple Nexus in practice and to look at the peace angle of it and what does peace mean in such contexts. And now we are really looking forward to pick this up and to further discuss tomorrow. Tomorrow morning we will start at 9:30. We will look into the donor policies, but also in practical terms into what does this all mean into practice for agencies if you really need to operationalize, if you really need to position to the Triple Nexus, which options do you have? And as indicated this morning, we will be happy to share our tiny analysis model, the avocado, as we call it, outlining 3 spheres of analysis for organizations and 3 options how to move forward in this world of this Triple Nexus, if it's so important as we all outlined over the course of the day. So stay tuned with us, please, and join us tomorrow again. We will have in the afternoon 3 spotlight sessions as well. So it will be another intense day and would be great if you stay with us. And with that, for me, it's time to give a big thank you, especially here for the whole team, to our colleagues who've done all the streaming over the course of the whole day on the camera, on the audio, and the screen. The team who's observed the chat all day and done all the technicalities. With a big thank you to all of them. We now take a break as well. We prepare for tomorrow. And so stay tuned, have a beer, a coffee, or whatever and wherever you are right now. Good afternoon, good night, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.